Please welcome Kon Leong, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of ZL Technologies.
Good morning. My talk today is about all the changes facing RIM. Lots of threats, but also lots of opportunities. I think the advent of big data threatens to bury RIM, but it also promises to resurrect it. And I'll start off with some of the changes we've seen in the last decade and a half in RIM. Back in the 1990s, we first started off with RIM being hard copy, switching over to digital. And that was a little bit different. But then fast forward to the 2000s, it really got to be a problem. The volumes kept increasing, and we built bigger and bigger sandcastles. ECM stepped in and tried to fill the void through workarounds, drag and drops for categorization and so forth. And towards the end of that decade, we saw specialized products such as archiving software trying to cope with the volumes. And then at the beginning of this decade, we had to build even bigger sandcastles because big data was starting to come in. And as the waves of data kept flowing in, unfortunately, the scale of the volume of data was just too much for most of our solutions. You might ask, what were the main reasons why we're not able to cope? And I could point to maybe some of the main reasons, such as data silos were on their way out. There is less and less tolerance, I feel, in the marketplace for data silos because the enterprise can't access them, can't use them. And the applications also have to be unified, so there's this grand trend towards unification. Unfortunately, that also results in a tremendous growth in data to be managed. The second is that we're being asked more and more to include more types of data. We've gone from email to files to IMs to include social media, and now we're being asked to fold in structured data, semi-structured data, logs data, and soon to come you'll be hearing about the Internet of Things data and the Internet of Everything data. And the last one is perhaps a little bit subtle, but even more impactful. Analytics has become very much the hot thing of the day. And here we're talking about keeping more data versus less data. And we still are trying to grapple with just how much data. But we're talking about, in the aggregate, when you have to manage all of this data, you're talking about increasing volumes of data by as much as 3 orders of magnitude. So we've gone in a very short period of time from managing buckets of water to managing water towers, and now we have to manage massive data lakes of data. So you might ask, will this combination of the data lake and analytics spell the end of RIM? I don't know how many of you actually have worked with analytics, because a fair question to ask is analytics just a fad or is it fundamental change? If I can have a show of hands as to how many of you have actually worked with analytics, please raise your hands. Okay, so it's still the beginning stage. I thought I'd give you a sense of what analytics brings to the table by using a use case, and then you can get a sense of where it's going for the next decade. So let's take, for example, let's say I'm a compliance officer looking at all the data that I have, and I'm trying to figure out, gee, is there something I should be looking at? Is there something suspicious? So let's say I narrow the search to email and sales activity. I get a look at the communications, and this is what I would call a hairball. And I say, well, this doesn't do me much good. Let me take a look at the data as it relates to contracts, because that's usually more sensitive. So I say, give me the same diagram, but only pertaining to contracts. And I get this instead, which breaks everything down by the stages of the contract cycle. And I say, well, this looks interesting. There's more activity over here, this period of time. And this is my focus, the negotiations stage of the contract, because that's usually where the shenanigans happen. So I say, fine, focus on these two areas and redraw the map. And this is what I get. When I take a closer look, I find that John Doe is at the center of all of this in contracts for that time period. And I say, let me take a look at what he's doing. And these are his, this is John Doe here, and these are his top 10 people that he communicates with. And I say, okay, what's he communicating about? What are the topics that he's talking about? And I say, give me the topics. And the analytics programs will analyze it by topic and color code it based on my level of interest. And obviously, ethics is a big one for me. So I say, can you focus on ethics? And I get this. And it says, yes, indeed, there are some documents relating to ethics, such as this one. I take a closer look, and I find that it refers to ethics, and it's referring to a certain company called Sales Finish. So now I've got something to grab on to in terms of my investigation, and I say, okay, let's go back, and let me just focus on Sales Finish for that time period. And this is what I get, Sales Finish. And I see that John Doe is still very much in the loop there. And I say, let me see his communications on Sales Finish. And this is what I get. These are his top communications over here, the top people. And I say, the most often communicated with is the man in finance. Okay, let's take a look at the communications between those two. And let's look at emails first. And these are the documents that went between those two. And here, analytics can come in again. Instead of me having to open every document, every attachment, and read through tomes of data, I can say, can you summarize the essence of every document so I can see if I should go further or just leave it alone? And here is a summary of all those documents, just drawing out the essence and highlighting the stuff that's usually related to my areas of interest. And I find that there's an expense of $16,000 on a trip to Panama and something about a contract item of $78,000. And right there, I have the basis on which to ask more questions. Notice when I started, I didn't know what I was looking for. Also note that traditional technologies like search will not get you here. It's not possible. And also note that the more data that you have at your disposal to analyze, the more complete your picture. And lastly, it would be nice if all of this was real time or near real time, so you can actually manhandle all of the data at your fingertips. This gives you a sense of what the power of analytics brings to bear, and it's not just for compliance officers, but for pretty much every function out there. In fact, if you take a look at all the things it's capable of doing, these are some of the use cases that we have seen from the user community. Each and every one of them is tremendously impactful on both the organization and its performance. The top line and the bottom line and every line in between. It affects every area in the organization, from finance to the rank and file, and all the way up to the CEO and the board of directors. Just as a for example, the CEO would be very interested in post-merger integration analytics. Why? Because occasionally they go out and buy a company for billions of dollars, and usually they face failure because of post-merger integration. Wouldn't it be nice if you could have analytics assist you in viewing the entire integration process, see where it's happening, and most importantly, see where it's not happening, and then fix it early before you get the report too late. Each and every one of these will impact corporate performance. And herein lies the conundrum. Governance and analytics go together. Basically, I've come to the conclusion you can't have one without the other. Now, here's an interesting conflict between the two. They're kind of like oil and water. Kind of reminds me of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. On the one hand, governance wants to keep less data. On the other hand, analytics wants to keep more data. And I don't know if your organization has started talking about this or arguing about it, but it probably will happen and it must happen, and each organization has to feel what the right trade-off is. And it's particularly difficult to get to a conclusion because you're asked to choose between two good things. You're asked to choose between minimizing risk or maximizing corporate performance. My sense is that the right-hand side is going to win. It's still early, but that's what I feel. Now, the next slide is probably most important to this congregation, and that is that it is more than a fad, it is an absolutely fundamental force. Analytics is coming in, and it's coming in like a tsunami. However, there are some challenges that are very important from the RIM perspective. For one thing, analytics requires data access, control of privileges. Otherwise, you'd have this ludicrous situation where anyone can go in and search for the CEO's emails. So therefore, there has to be very rigid control of access. Secondly, you will continue to have some sort of retention and deletion simply because it's silly to keep everything, because some are really trash, such as, for example, newsletters and subscriptions. You really don't have much value there. Thirdly, you will need classification. At the very least, just for the top two items, you will need classification. Fourthly, you will need audit trails. Who touched what, who searched what, when. And lastly, all of this still has to conform with governance requirements, including e-discovery, compliance, and so forth. And if you look at this list of things that have to happen for analytics, the inescapable conclusion is that it looks a lot like RIM. And therefore, RIM is back. Bigger, better, improved. Not cheaper, I hope. There is, however, a big difference, and that is that with big data, just to scale the enormity of the difference in scaling, you will need a bigger RIM. As I said before, 1,000-fold increase in capacity, and much more in terms of sophistication. There is a completely new generation of RIM required today. Unfortunately, these things do take time to build and architect. But we've got to stop building sandcastles, even if they're bigger, and we've got to focus now on building fortresses, like so, because the waves of data will keep coming. And my suspicion is it's 1,000-fold increase today. In 10 years' time, it'll be another 1,000-fold on top of that with the advent of IoT and IoE. Long story short, I believe these are the most exciting times for RIM yet. There are lots of changes happening. There are lots of threats. And by the same token, there are lots of opportunities. If you want more detail on this, please stop by our booth, 325. And tomorrow I will be giving an education session at 10:40 a.m. Catch us there. Thank you.